It's time for Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, inviting the atheist, agnostic, and skeptic to examine for themselves the evidence for the Christian faith. We are all limited by what we do not know and by the things we think we know but are not true. Dr. Joe Mott earned his PhD at LSU and was a distinguished math professor at Florida State University for 38 years, helping to write 3 math textbooks and authoring over 30 research articles in math. He is now the host of this radio program, Defending and Commending the Faith. Here is Joe Mott.
Hello to everyone. Thank you for your presence in the audience. Welcome to the program. Followers of Christ are still being called into action for defending and commending the Christian faith. Allow me to preface my remarks for the podcast by making some comments about the condition of our nation. Our nation is in serious trouble. I will address only 4 symptoms of our nation's malady. First, how slavish are we in imitating the value systems of our peers? Second, we are being overrun by illegal immigrants. Third, fentanyl drugs with the consequent crime and violence is having a dangerous effect on everybody. Fourth, we are being damaged morally by the evil effects of transgenderism and abortion. I am a firm believer in the law of sowing and reaping. We shall reap whatsoever we sow. We are sowing discord and immorality. That is what we will reap. My comments will focus largely on the last symptom. Both transgenderism and abortion are legal, but immoral and unconscionable. In my opinion, these practices should be criminal. Abortion sheds innocent blood, which the Bible declares is an abomination to God. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 17. J. Warner Wallace, former LAPD detective and TV Dateline participant, because of numerous appearances there for cold cases he had solved. He says there are 3 causes for criminal activity. 1, greed. 2, to obtain or maintain political power. And 3, sexual lust. What is going on here? Any truth claim without supporting evidence is merely an opinion. Opinions are like noses. Everybody has one. Opinions vary, but truth is always constant. Minds are like parachutes. They have to be open to be effective. So what I have to say will be largely speculative, but hopefully coherent. The culture is partially to blame for our situation. I am constantly amazed at how much the philosophies of this world and the culture have influenced our lives, our nation's institutions, and the international church. Postmodernism, to me, is the worst philosophy in all of history. The church shares some of the blame. We've been living in our Christian affluent cubbyholes, cut off from the outside world, content to live our lives uninvolved with what is going on in our backyard. Meanwhile, evil has incrementally marched into every area of our culture. First, in our media. Second, in our nation's educational system, including our schools, our universities, our seminaries. Third, our entertainment industry. And fourth, in our legal system, including the Department of Justice and the upper echelons of the FBI. Most abysmally, corruption also has crept into our government. Our government system is supposed to operate according to the consent of the governed. But some political parties are trying to force compliance to their way of addressing the issue, overriding the preferences of the governed. The blame can be spread even more. The legislatures and the politicians are responsible for the laws of our land, and they are condoning the two practices of abortion and transgenderism. Some churches and police departments are speaking out in opposition to these practices, but the woke politicians are calling to defund the police. Still others are opposing those churches who speak out. That looks to me like greed, but the church is too impotent to do anything about the situation. Some political parties are contributing to the dilemma. Laws are being passed to prevent parents of teens not being informed regarding radical surgery. That looks like seeking to gain and maintain power. Fleas don't fly, cats don't bark, and politicians don't speak the truth. What about the medical community? Any doctor who has taken the Hippocratic oath to do no harm and who promotes transgenderism to any young person before they are mature enough to make a reasonable decision about any change of gender, I believe should go to jail because the doctor is guilty of child abuse. What about feminism? First, we should define feminism, since the term can have different meanings for different people. I am referring to modern feminists who fight for abortion on demand, language dominance, insisting on saying chairperson instead of chairman, for example, and the blurring of gender lines. Any pregnant female who declares she is in control of her own body is really making a decision for two bodies and not just her own body in her decision to abort. She is guilty of killing the other body and shedding innocent blood. My opinion is she should be taken to court. Despite all rationalizations to the contrary, that body inside her body, after a few weeks, has a heart engaged in pumping blood. The DNA is set to develop organs. The body is sensitive to pain, and if left free of intervention and given proper care, will have a very high probability of being born healthily. All human choices have human consequences. Sometimes the consequences may be inconvenient, others immoral, even criminal. Furthermore, any person who votes for a political party who supports both practices of abortion and transgenderism and employs the Great Society's advocacy of fatherless families and dependents on welfare should realize that these practices are not beneficial in the long run. What do you think should be done to those who do and say these things? How do we deal with this miasma? 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14 gives an answer. If the Lord's people, who are called by God's name, Christians and Jews, shall do 4 things: humble themselves, pray, seek the Lord's face, and turn from their wicked ways, then God promises to do 3 things: hear our prayers, forgive our sin, and heal our land. Notice that God's people are wicked. Why? Because they have shirked their responsibility and allowed evil to prevail. Now let's return to my remarks for the podcast. For several episodes, we have been discussing Norman Geisler's list of 12 words for some aspect of salvation. The list is taken from Geisler's book, Systematic Theology, Volume 3, pages 222 to 227. We've discussed recently concerning the 9th term, forgiveness, and in the context of Paul's metaphors, we gave additional information on justification, the 10th term, and propitiation, the 11th term. I addressed 6 metaphors taken from a book by William Barclay called The Letter to the Romans. In addition, Barclay has another book, Many Witnesses, One Lord, that discusses the same 6 metaphors. But these 6 are nowhere near all the New Testament references to Paul's metaphors. David J. Williams has a book of over 300 pages entitled Paul's Metaphors, where each page includes several of Paul's metaphors. Geisler's 12th term, atonement, is one of the most important expressions for salvation. The original design of creation was that humans would walk with God in the luxurious Garden of Eden. Before disobeying God, Adam and Eve walked and talked with God in the cool of the evening. They apparently were created for fellowship with God. The sin of disobedience spoiled all that. The penalty for eating the fruit was death, spiritual death. Physical death of the body would come later. But most significantly, their relationship with God changed dramatically. No more walking and talking as friends. Sin had soiled the goodness of creation. And since God is just and holy, the penalty must be paid, and the crown of creation, humanity, must be brought back to fellowship with God, for that was God's purpose all along. Atonement, coming back to God, is a common theme in the Old Testament, particularly in Leviticus. The Old Testament translation for atonement is taken from the Hebrew word kaphar, which literally means to cover. The Touch Bible says the word for cover signifies to purge, make an atonement, make reconciliation, to cover with pitch, like for the sacred ark. It is used for clothing or secrecy. Clothing for self, conceal, clothe, cover self, flee, to hide. The King James Version translates kaphar with the idea to appease, to disannul, to forgive, to be merciful, to pacify, to pardon, to purge, to put away, and to reconcile. The Old Testament process took public form in animal sacrifices, for in the Hebrew world, the proper payment for sin was blood. Quotes, almost all things are by the law purged with blood, and without shedding of blood is no remission, no forgiveness, end quotes. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 22. An elaborate system of animal sacrifice developed, but just as clearly, God's justice and holiness was not made whole by animals alone. Even in the Old Testament, strong hints of a final, complete, and all-sufficient sacrifice is promised. especially in Isaiah's prophecy in Isaiah chapter 53, where a man of sorrows, a suffering servant, would bear our griefs and carry our sorrows. He would be wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace would be upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. For the transgressions of God's people he was stricken. That's in Isaiah chapter 53, verses 4 and 5, 6b and 8b. That man of sorrows, suffering servant, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whose death on the cross paid the penalty for sin and brings believers back to God because he purchased us with his own blood, Acts chapter 20, verse 28, and 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 20. Jesus' death and resurrection fulfills the work that animal sacrifices began but could never complete. Allow me to close this episode by reminding you, exercise daily. Walk with God.
Thank you for listening to Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, a production of Wave 94 Radio in Tallahassee, Florida. If you have any questions or comments for Joe, please forward them to Doug Apple at Wave94 at this email address, dougapple@wave94.com. And be sure to join us every Monday evening at 6:45 p.m. on Wave 94 and subscribe through your favorite podcast app. Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott.